Well, ladies and gentlemen, for our second panel of the night, I'm going to be your moderator. My name is Jonathan Chan. I am one of the co-founders of the Horology Club, and it is my pleasure to be hosting you for the panel titled, Should Modern Watch Design Be Inspired by the Past or Look to the Future? And joining us tonight, we have four of the masterminds behind some of the most exciting independent brands. On my furthest left, we have Etienne Malek, the mastermind CEO and founder of Baltic Watches. They create vintage-inspired watches at a very extremely competitive price point. So welcome, Etienne. Then next to him, we have Claude Garza, co-founder of Armand Strong, a brand that has roots deep in heritage, but nowadays taking technical innovation to the next level. Next to him, we have Michael Fultinix. Your name I always screw up, Dutch name. But Dutch brand from Delft, who are very good experts in 3D printing technology, creating some of the most interesting cases that we see in the industry today. And finally, but last but not least, Praneeth Rajin, the CEO of Main Watches. For me, one of the most recognizable designs in modern watchmaking history. Even without the branding on the dial, you can recognize the name from afar. So, watch design is such an important aspect of a watch. You could have the best parts, the best chronometry, but if you don't have design, you're not going to capture the eyeballs of the end consumer or collector. So, most importantly, how do we design? Should we be looking to the past or the future? So we're going to start off with Etienne. Your watch is obviously very vintage inspired. Some people, some critics might say, how can there be innovation if you're always looking at the past? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Hello everyone. I think the design starts with sculpture. You know, before to do a brand, before to even be a designer, before all of that, you are a collector, I think. I think there is only few people that are doing design without, being interested in the design they do in the field of work, So
you always have that culture of the field you love, And for watches, we are all collector. We all actually, looked a lot of watches, be inspired. We love them, we collect them, and that is culture for us. So I think we need to embrace the fact that we need to respect the roots of the vintage watches that have been done before us. We are just, people that gonna bring the horology from today to the next 10, 20, 30 years, and after that, there are gonna be others that gonna have other ideas. But one thing that will remain is the past. It's always gonna be here. And I think we need to always look back and see if there is something that we missed somewhere, because there is always something interesting. It's a 4-centimeter diameter object. It's small. It's been here since hundreds of years, and we kind of tested everything. But we can still innovate. We can still mix few things, different kind of things. We can still find different formula for them. So I think being innovative today can be kind of two ways. It can be incremental innovation and it can be disruptive. Some of you guys are way more disruptive than what we actually do, but what we try to do is just to find the tweaks that we like. We try to find a comfort zone on which we're going to find the right proportion, the right element that's going to work. And because, we try to be affordable as well, we have a lot of constraints, so we need to fight, that constraint by design. So yes, I think, we need to look back in the past, we need to find new ways, but sometimes you need to find that comfort zone. So I think small innovation are possible too. You don't have to be always really, really disruptive because people need to find their comfort.
And I actually quite agree with your approach. You guys create these watches that are it looks like a vintage watch, but there's modern tweaks to it. So minor things like proportion, thickness, the size of the watch, you guys are really nailing it. But someone on the opposite side of the things, for me, I think Ming is creating some of the most modern-looking watches. How do you guys feel about, does classic watch design play a part? Do you guys look at your designs and say, actually, we're looking into vintage, but actually doing something that's completely modern, or does classic watch design not play a part at all in your design?
Well, firstly, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. And I think Etienne started that, touched on this, but watchmaking for us, while it is modern in our design, it's very much rooted in tradition and in the past. Like Ming as a brand wouldn't exist without sort of 200-300 years of collective watchmaking. So I don't think you can ever, not that we're trying to, but I don't think you can ever run away from the past, right? So in that sense, it is informed by our own personal collecting experience, by having conversations with our collectors, our supporters, and their collecting experience. And everybody collects for different reasons. And it all starts with, even for us as enthusiasts, we were collecting other watches before we started Ming. So it's definitely informed by whether it's a theme. Sometimes you just want, whether it's a dress watch or a sport watch. I personally love chronographs. So it's always, at least within the team, it's always this hunt for unique chronograph movements and how wild can we go with it. And I think where we've been successful and been able to sort of, what you call modern design, I think of more as just Ming Tian's design vision, because it's just one person designing everything, right? And we've joked about this, and it continues to be true. It's always designed by dictatorship. So Ming will design everything to this day, from the straps to the watches to every single element. And where I come in, or the rest of the team come in, is we're sort of the design buffer. So he'll design something, and if I don't take to it, we'll have this debate, this argument. And if he can convince me, it'll probably go into production and development.
Does he normally convince you more than the other way around?
I mean, the odds are in his favor. I wouldn't bet against him. But there have been times where I'm like, listen, I get where you're going with this, but we should probably make it a piece unique and, enjoy it. Let's not make this commercially. But I think it's that singularity of vision which is translated into what people think of as modern design or modern watchmaking. But it's very much informed by watchmaking tradition as a whole, our individual collecting experience as well.
Right, so the brand is actually very much rooted with the classic watchmaking. You guys have sometimes vintage watch movements, but with a modern design.
Exactly.
Yes. So on the same note, Michael, a lot of your watches, when you design, I actually see very futuristic modern cases, but with classic dials. So for you, would you say the modern side of things speak to you more, or the vintage side of things?
I think a dial, I come from architecture, so I'm not a watchmaker. I'm self-taught watchmaker, but not officially. So I'm a designer, watch designer and watchmaker, but above all, I used to look at myself and also our company as an architect and an architectural firm. I'm not that biased by watches to start from. Actually, I think most watches are extremely boring. So I try to look at the watch as an object and how you can manipulate that object. So it's a very small object, obviously. It's very important. You can always wear it. There's a lot of meaning to it. So how can you create within this very limited space something which has many layers? And for me personally, it's the question: how do you create architecture on the wrist? Because architecture it's just a word, but in fact it's something which is very integrated, very inclusive. It's not a building. It can be a sculpture. It can be the interior. It can be that strange little chair over there. And how do you capture that all inside of this small object? That's my quest. Of course, I started with collecting vintage watches and restoring them. That's how I learned watchmaking. So you're always looking to old designs, but the old designs which I find attractive were designs which had these, obviously, the horn lugs or the 1940s and 50s American style watches, because they tried shapes which were unconventional often, but they were very limited to specific techniques like stamping, milling. So I try to learn from that and try to look from a different perspective as an architect would do. What kind of shape, what kind of design, what kind of finishing would I want? And then what kind of technique should I use to create that? And that's the reason why we came or I started with 3D printing because that's the only way we can create sculptures. But the dial, indeed, the dial is a relatively flat object. And also when you want good architecture is total integration. The chair should fit the house. So it means you actually need to make the dial, you need to make the movement eventually, was always my dream, because then you have the overall impact. So I needed to make dials. How do you make a dial? I don't know. So I bought this old machine, 120 years old, pet printer. And then you have flat surface and you can make pet printing. And then you come up with old school things because it's old school techniques. So I think also in that sense, we're constantly learning how to evolve and to create more interesting dials. I also like the work of Ming a lot for that reason. Also, well, actually, you're very good with proportions and you have interesting combinations of technique with the dials, integrated objects. So you also look to others, but not too much.
And what about you, Claude? We've been talking about how classic watch design plays a part in your brand's design. What do you think about classic watch design and how it plays a part in Armand Strom?
My approach is maybe a little bit different. First of all, I agree that the classical inspiration has to be somewhere there. We talked about this comfort zone. I think this is because we have created habits to how a watch should look like, how a watch should feel, about our taste. I mean, watchmaking is all about tradition. The reason why we still buy watches also because it keeps its value. We want to have long-living designs. And therefore, I think the classic components are very important. My background is more, as you mentioned, we are more into watch movement. So the movement is very important to Armand Strom, the movement innovation. So, but I'm got trained as a watchmaker, graduated in watch restoration. So my first approach was antique clocks, pocket watches, then go to vintage wristwatches, and then had the opportunity to build up the brand Armand Strom and create this movement manufactory. All our movement inspiration are inspired by the past. There were unsolved problems, which other watchmakers maybe tried to achieve, but they didn't have the same technology than we have today. They don't have the same, they didn't have the three-dimensional softwares to engineer their watch movements. And I think, yeah, we go back in history, we see where did they stop, and how can we, push the boundaries of those complications further. So there's a lot of inspiration in the past. There is a lot of vintage components because we want to create this comfort zone, and then we're going to let the movement for itself, and it's more a balance about form follows function approach.
But while I have you, maybe I'd like to ask, how do you balance, obviously paying tribute to Mr. Armand Strom, in his watches when he made them skeletonized, all very good skeletonized designs. How did you balance paying tribute to that, but also innovating and creating something new for Armand Strom when you took over? Was it hard to balance the two aspects of design?
Well, Armin always told me that his vision is that a movement should not be covered with a dial, a movement should be visible. When he started his brand in 1967, he didn't have the opportunity to buy CNC machines and to develop his own movement, but he was strongly believing in hand finishing and of this three-dimensional mechanical art. So this is why he bought movements, he open worked them, he finished them. He did one of the best hand finishing he could do back in those days with the engravings. And now for us now it's a classic, but in his days it was very avant-gardistic because he was one of the first who saw a mechanical movement, and especially when the first battery quartz movement came, he was the guy who was believing in, no, we should not throw the mechanical movements away. We should show how they work. We should, get people excited about what's inside of the movement, because he had to fight against battery, quartz, all these evolutions which took place back in those days. And this is what we do today. Maybe in 20 years or in 30 years, there will be another leader of Armand Strom sitting here, and then you're going to ask, maybe somebody going to ask him the same question. But Armand Strom had his vision as a watchmaker. It's now called vintage because he is 87 years old, but I think he was driven by the same values and the same mentality. It's just now it's a different period of time, so the design has obviously evolved, but the roots and the spirit of the brand, I think, is exactly what Mr. Armstrong started to create.
So very good. I think you're definitely successfully continuing that legacy and using the same principles. Why don't we move a little bit to the production of the watches? I'll ask you, Etienne. You obviously believe in the vintage proportions of watches, but nowadays with movements and maybe parts not having the same specifications, did you find it was tough to produce watches to maybe fit the cases, or maybe sometimes you might not have the movements that fit? Was it a tough process for you?
I don't know if it's a tough process, but I think you need to make a design first knowing which movement you're going to use. And fact is, making a movement is more complicated commercially than before, I guess. So there is, for our markets, there is less choices than before. Small movements, square movements, other type of movement, they are not available anymore for third-party, brands like we are, because we don't belong to a group, we don't belong to, a big company that could provide these movements. So it's getting harder and harder for us to have a wide range of choices in movement. So we need, starting from that point, to choose the movement for what we would like to do. And the movement, they are bigger than before, they are thicker as well. And we have less choices in terms of complication. Of course, if you do much more expensive watches, you can find smaller and thinner movement, but it's not our case. And this is something that we need to play with. And I think there is always ways to try to hide a little bit the fact that they are bigger and thicker. And you need to find tricks in terms of design to make them appear a little bit thinner than they really are. So they're going to appear a bit thinner when you see it, but actually in terms of measurement, it's going to be the same. And this is by playing in terms of layers on the case, in terms of glass. So it's always, you need to find the right solution. You need to find new ways to try to work on those proportions. So I think it might be different than before, but overall, if you start working in that order, making from movement first, and after doing your design, I think it's much easier than doing the reverse process, on which you can have quite a lot of troubles.
So in a way, you're also still innovating, but innovating maybe in the production to get the same aesthetic. So maybe going back to you and Pranith, with Ming, as I mentioned earlier, your designs are always so recognizable even without the branding. How do you feel, what has been the most important aspects that has made Ming such a recognizable brand? Like what core elements do you think Ming watches have and that you would like to see continue in the brand moving forward?
I think what's helped us stand out and have a very unique design language, it's a simple answer. It's Ming Tian designing everything, right? Even till today, there's never a point where we go to him and we're like, hey, next year I think we should make a chronograph with this movement and this should be the case size and it should have this dial color. I think if I did that, he'd throw me off the balcony. But we'll have a conversation, right? The lightweight came across that way. I remember, I think it was the Piaget that held the world record that year. And it had just come out, and Ming and I were having a drink and a cigar, and I was like, hey, how difficult would it be to make like a record-breaking watch for us? And then he comes back 2 days later, and he's like, we're going to make the world's lightest watch, right? And then that's how the process works between us. But because he's originating all the visual identity, I think that's what's helped us stand out so quickly and so consistently. As the brand continues to evolve and grow, I think the bits that we're working very hard and fighting very hard to hold on to is not any specific design element, but rather design principles. A big one for us is we always strive for radial balance. And balance isn't the same as symmetry. You can have sort of an asymmetric dial that's balanced because then it creates tension, but it always keeps your interest. A big one for Ming has always been, we like to think of it as reductivism. And it's informed more by like us being photographers, where I think an ideal photograph is when you can't take anything else away from the frame without changing the substance of the image. And it's the same thing for a watch or a watch design, right? Everything that is in the watch has to play a role, even if it is a maximalist design. Every single element, index, scale has to have a reason for being there. And by constantly cutting away and questioning every single element, I think you're left with with the essence of a design, of a theme. And I think that's something we'll strive to continue keeping. And there's even things like our 12 o'clock marker. It started off as a very obvious 0, and then over time it's evolved into what we now call the bob nose. So we never started off saying it always has to be a 0, but there was sort of a circular reference, and we've kept that as it's evolved. So even if you look at watch number 1 and our latest release, you still know it's a Ming, even though they actually share almost nothing in common.
So it sounds like Ming needs to come up with as many designs as possible so the brand can stay on forever.
Well, the design board right now is about 80 designs in, and we have what we call the design graveyard. So every design we printed but never been put into development or production, that's about 350 designs deep.
350.
And like I could go back and pick plenty that I think we should make, but Ming's like, nope, moving on.
Wow. I'll move on to Mikhail. You create some of the most interesting lugs in modern watch design. Clearly, you have a thing for interesting lugs. You like curvy lugs. But in vintage watches, we see a lot of different lugs. Is there anything that you think you want to bring back from vintage watch design, in particular to lugs? Is there something that you're thinking about, producing in the future to pay tribute to that?
I think we already do, but it's a bit like you said. Everything is evolution. So there's not such a thing as total free creativity. Like it's always based on something. If somebody says it's totally original, it's always a lie. It's not. It's because you always have a reference. Yeah, I have a particular vintage watch, which actually I bought it. I remember very well. It has these corne de vache, right? But executed very well, and it's from 1950 something. Going back purely to that would be super boring for me. So I think you need to evolve on design, take out the good points, and then think of which is what technology, exactly like you said in techniques, what technology offers you to improve. But it is something quite difficult because to really improve it, to really improve something which is really good, it needs to be really good, right? It needs to be better even. So I don't make that much designs because every watch for me is like a personal evolution for myself. And I tend to take a lot of time for every design, look at it from all angles, and maybe continue on previous topics or previous designs, but then how to make something new which has the same quality in 50 years. So every watch, and that's also referring to your previous question about the dials and what you said about tradition. So tradition forms our references, right? It forms what we like, etc. And it's very difficult to change that. So that's also why the history is very important. But you can also shape that. It's just like society. Like Hong Kong now is probably different than 50 years ago. I think there's worldwide, that's a big issue in the Netherlands, Europe, is that we tend to be so conservative that it blocks evolution. So you have to have this prosperative mind, but be very careful. There's a lot of things in my designs which are not good. And then I like to ditch it also. I might ditch too fast, actually, commercially. But I can only say there's always a tradition, but making a new historical reference, like that's how to do that is so freaking difficult. I hope we can contribute to that.
Well, it's been a while, so maybe a final question to all four of you. Do you guys find it limiting working at a brand to really truly innovate because you're constrained by the brand's design DNA? Sometimes maybe there's something you want to do, but because of your brand, you can't do it. Do you think that limits you? It's an open question for any one of you.
Two things. I think tradition is extremely limiting because I see from reactions that people, even though I think my designs are quite simple, not everybody understands it or is bound or like formed by ideas that certain things can't be done. So they are confused. Other things is in this industry is money always. Like you can dream very big, but you need to pay for the developments, right? So it's always a struggle how to do that. That's why I admire your brand and what you did and how much you do in-house now. It's very impressive.
So yeah, in Armstrong, I definitely, when I was setting up the company, the manufacturing for the company, this is the freedom I wanted to have. I mean, a watchmaker, if you want to create watch movements and having the watch movement as the star of the brand, I mean, there's the sky is the limit. So an Armstrong, we can still involve, we can be innovative and creative when it comes to movement innovation. As we learned tonight, I mean, there's a comfort zone, there is expectations from our customers because they are used to buy watches. They have the expectation when it comes to a watch, how the watch should look like. So I have the full freedom to be creative and innovative when it comes to movement details. And this is my background. So for my personal future, that's a dream, yeah.
I don't think being part of a brand has ever felt like a limiting factor. I don't want to speak for the other three, but I suspect it's the same case. I think the advantage of being independent and sort of building on our, to be honest, it's a selfish dream, right? We're making watches we want to make. And I think that's never limiting. It's the reality of making watches that's usually more limiting because you always have ideas, but like Michelle said, you got to think about, hey, how am I going to pay for the development of these ideas? And at some point, you cross this threshold, at least for us, we did, where Meg and I woke up one day and we said, hey, this isn't just a passion project. We're now a brand, which means in addition to thinking about new development, you got to think about how you're going to take care of your existing customers, service, support. And there's this whole world you have to build around every watch you make and deliver. And I think the reality of that is constraining, but I guess the counter argument is really evolutionary or revolutionary design, innovation, whatever, has always come out of constraints, right? So if you're given a completely free hand and an endless budget, I don't know what that would turn out like, but I think most of our, including the Bluefin, by the way, we won the GPHE with it, but it was a watch that almost didn't happen and like was the closest it came to killing us for a whole bunch of sort of production challenges. But I mean, look at how it ended up, right?
I think the limit is the one that you impose to yourself, for sure. But I think in every brand, you know, like depending on the guys and people behind, there is kind of a inertia, you know. And I think the more the history of the brand is complex and long, the more inertia there is. So I guess as independent and pretty recent brand, more or less, you can feel that inertia. And sometimes you feel it's kind of coming because you have an idea and you're like, okay, this is really different. Should I really do this? Or this is not going to be understood by the people, you know? So, and I guess this kind of question comes to your mind, you know, like from time to time when you want to do something really different. But I guess, you know, we're not in the point where, you know, imposing yourself some limits is something that you can do.
Yeah, add a little thing. I think the difference between brands here and supported by the Horology Club also is with big brands is that we're independent. So as long as you're, well, all of us are the founders and maybe designers of the things that we make, it's very much an evolution of your own style, and you should also probably always develop something which you are very passionate about. So you're bound to indeed your own limits and your own traditions, etc. But if you're not making anymore what you really stand behind, then you should question yourself if you shouldn't stop. So, because it's a personal thing. So I think that's, for me personally, but probably also for others, I think the whole process of creating the brand and developing the watches is like almost like an emancipation project. You have a certain style, but you don't know how to define it yet, how to make it yet, and you grow over time, and you also make your statement much more over time. But you also need to improve that. So.
I'd just like to thank everyone for sharing your insights today. You know, I think the future of watchmaking and independent watchmaking is in good hands. Innovation is very exciting for us. So thank you for your time. Thank you for attending the panel. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.